Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to Outdoor Indoor Texan. Today I'll be showing y'all my recipe for venison bone broth. If you home process your deer, or even just have various bones left over from other cooks, this is a great way to turn what's otherwise considered waste into a delicious liquid gold. Now, many people confuse the terms broth and stock, including myself. So just to be clear, a stock is usually considered a base ingredient, whereas a broth can be served on its own. So with this recipe, we're going to take the leftover bones from a deer, add some common ingredients easily available at the store or already in your kitchen, and end up with a fantastic broth you can enjoy out of a mug as is, or use it as a base for soups, stews, braising meat, and beyond. Starting out, and no big surprise, you'll need some deer bones. I've found that leg bones and shoulder bones are usually the best suited for this work since I'm already breaking down those sections for meat anyhow. Also, don't freak out if you have scrap meat stuck to the bones. Leave it on as it'll help round out your broth's overall flavor. Now take some olive oil, or any cooking oil of your choice, and give those bones a nice light coating. After the oil, preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit and toss in your pan for about 30 minutes up to an hour. Pull them out once the bones and meat are browned and semi-charred. So why are we oven roasting deer bones? Well, using roasted bones adds a deeper, fuller, and richer flavor to the broth thanks to the caramelization of the meat and marrow. Also, the heat helps loosen up collagen that is then imparted to the broth. Finally, it'll also make your broth much darker, which everyone seems to like. Now transfer your bones into a large stock pot and then add cold water until they're covered by a few inches. Then transfer that pot to your range, set it on high heat, and bring everything up to a rolling boil. Now, this is a very important step that you'll need to keep an eye on throughout the broth making process. If you see foamy scum or fat globs floating on the surface, spoon that junk out. Venison fat has a waxy texture in your mouth that's quite unpleasant, so it's vital to skim off every bit that you find. I'll chirp on this later, but just in case you're the type of viewer who stops the video early to get started on the recipe, I'll say it here too. Once you're done with your broth and it's cooling in a jar, don't freeze it immediately. Wait until it's fully chilled because fat will typically form a white barrier on the top and it'll give you an easy last chance to skim out all that junk. Anyways, after the boil, reduce your heat until the water is steaming and giving off a bubble or two every minute, but no longer full on rolling. Cover the pot and let those bones simmer for a minimum of 4 hours up to overnight. This low and slow simmer just gets better with time, so forget about it for a while and go finish up some household chores. After that long initial simmer, it's time to add our aromatics to the broth. First up is 1 whole white onion, rough chopped with the skin on. Add 2 carrots, again rough chopped, unpeeled. Add 2 stalks of celery, about 1/4 to 1/2 bunch of parsley, the saddest couple of sprigs of rosemary for my winter beaten garden, 1 tablespoon of whole peppercorns, about 4 to 6 cloves of garlic, depending on how much you love it. I'm using minced, but smashed whole cloves are also totally fine. And finally, add 3 to 4 bay leaves. Now bring that pot up to a very busy simmer, cover it, and then let it cook down for 2 hours. After 2 hours of simmering, turn off the heat, grab your tongs, and remove all the large pieces of bone and vegetable you can find. These guys have done their job, and you can now throw them out. Once you've got the big pieces removed, pour your broth into a large bowl using a fine mesh strainer in order to filter out the remaining sediment. Now, some folks prefer serious filtration at this point and use cheesecloth or paper towels put inside the mesh strainer. You're of course welcome to go that route, as it will definitely remove even more particles from the broth and probably help out a great deal with skimming out some of that fat. But in my experience, I've been happy with just using the mesh strainer. I somehow never grab a big enough bowl, so feel free to skip all this overcomplicated multi-bowl pouring thing I'm doing here and simply pour your liquid into another large stock pot. Whichever way you get there, just make sure you have the liquid back in a clean stock pot for our final cooking step. Now, some of my eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that I haven't added salt yet, and if you taste this broth up to this point, you might think I've lost my mind based on how muted and bland the flavors are. As the final cooking step, add a couple teaspoons of salt to the still warm broth, stir it in well, and taste. Repeat this process until you're happy with the flavor. We could have added a dash or 2 of salt at the beginning, but as liquids reduce, salt doesn't. So instead of accidentally over-salting it at the beginning, I prefer to reserve that final flavor enhancement for the very end. Once you're happy with the flavor, transfer your broth into jars or some other smaller portion containers. Liquid expands when frozen, so if you plan on freezing, make sure there's a couple inches of headspace at the top of your jars. And like I mentioned at the beginning, before freezing the broth or cooking with it, let it chill in the fridge so that the last bit of fat forms on the top where you can easily skim it off and throw it out. That'll do it for this one, and thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions or tips of your own, feel free to leave a comment below, as I always try to make myself available to my viewers. If you're new to the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button for more great content to come. All right, y'all, take care.